And one of the things that you need to believe is deep down in your heart is that you're married to the right person. Because if you don't believe that you're married to the right person, in your heart of hearts, you separate yourself out from that person. Now, you're still living with them and things are still going on, but deep down inside, you're like, well, you know, our sinful nature is to think about ourselves. So now if you believe you're married to the wrong person, that person is no longer on par with you, they become less than you. So some of the things that you might want to do in that moment when you get married and realize it's no longer him and me, it's now we. So we have to adapt, we have to change, we have to grow. But it's very, very hard. And anybody that tells you marriage is easy, you just think in the back of your mind they're lying. Because this is one of the hardest things you ever do in your life, is to just be married. I don't mean in a legal sense, I mean connected. Like when God connected you, he put you together. You now have all the reasons in the world why you shouldn't be together, but your strength in your marriage is only gonna come as you create one, as you two die a little bit every day of yourself. I don't mean your personality and who you are and your quirkiness, but you're giving up a piece of yourself to be more like Jesus with the other person. So some of the things you have to do in order to have a healthy love pattern is you need to pray together. You need to have a regular date night. And if we could tell you the number of times we've spent with couples and said, you've got to go out. You've got to get out together. You've got to build a new you. Because once you get married, the dating thing is over. You know, there's laundry and dishes and sex and lots of things. And, you know, I like the dating thing. You came with flowers and I could get all dressed up and my mother would do the laundry and life was good. Now I'm the mother. Not necessarily having children, but like, I've got to do laundry. This was a cultural shock to my body because I didn't do laundry. I still don't do laundry, as a side note. And then you've got to have sex. You know, when God puts you together, you're not going to grow together without those 3 levels of a relationship within your marriage. You've got to have that agape love. You guys have got to develop a friendship that's like none anybody has ever seen. You can't be happily married without the friendship, because then you're really saying you stink as a person and I don't really like you, because why would I be friends with you? Yes, I like you well enough to marry you, but you're not really my friend. I'm gonna go over here with my friends. You don't fall into that category. If you find that your spouse is not your friend, really the way God talks about it, you need to work on that. Some of us have agape relationships greater than with outside people than we do inside our marriage. You've got to have that phileo sense of a friendship. And then, of course, you've got to have that eros. You've got to have all 3 of them to really have a marriage that God has ordained you to have. It can't be, well, we're best buds, but I don't like you in the bedroom, so we're just going to leave out the sex part. And, you know, like, or you're a great business partner, but I don't really like you. And the more we're married, the more I really don't like you. Because, you know, that can happen to you if you're not careful. If you don't enhance your skills at being married. Some of you think you get married and that's it. It's like marriage is the end of your life. You're now married and, you know, well, okay, we've been married a while. And so you stop working at your relationship. And the most critical skill when you're young and married is to be hard on yourself. Like, I can look at Dale and be very hard hard on him as a wife. Like, well, you don't do this, you don't do this, you don't do that. Now, that's not really true 45 years later. I'm like, hey, I'm living a life. I told you I don't do no laundry. He will do the dishes if the sink gets full. But he is as much a helper in the relationship as I am. He brings different things to the relationship, but everybody's doing 100%. You know, when Dale and I were first married, society was like, everybody just bring in 50%. So I was working, he was working, we combined all our money. In my mind, life is good, you know, I'm kicking in my 50%. So when things got tough, you could sit back and go, well, what's the problem? I'm working every day just like you. Don't come at me with X, Y, Z. But when we became Christians, it was clear that a marriage is everybody giving 100%. You can't hold anything back from this relationship or it's not going to work. Okay?
This may be a little late to ask this question, but is there anybody in here that's not married? Oh, good. Okay. I know my wife mentioned having sex. Listen, if there's no other way, then you need to schedule the sex. Now, I'm not a big fan of scheduling it. I'm a pretty sort of off-the-cuff kind of guy. But if that's what you have to do, then do that. Because while it may seem like it's not the most important part, it is an integral part of your marriage. And without it, you're going to have some issues. Now, there are obviously medical issues that can come up that can interrupt that sort of thing. But I'm talking about if you are able, then you need to be involved. Okay? Enough said about that. So attitudes like character and sense of purpose, those attributes rather, like character and a sense of purpose, those are the kinds of things that are less likely to change than things like how you look and what your interests are. And also, a lot of us are guilty of, when we're courting, overlooking attributes that maybe we don't like so much about a person because they have some attributes that we're really into. And so we just focus on that. However, when one of those attributes starts to fade or go away or you get used to it, then you got a problem, you know? Marriages are made or broken in the transitions that occur in our lives. You know, between the transitions, things tend to run smoothly, okay? And you don't really get tested there. But it's the changes that point out those situations to us. It's those changes that test us. And we all need to realize that the quality of our love is going to be determined by how we handle the changing seasons that every marriage is going to encounter. So one of the things you need to do is you need to expect for your spouse to change. See, the old thing, men marry women and want them to stay the same, and women marry men and want to change them. I mean, that's an old adage, and a lot of times it's true, but everybody's going to change. If you are the same person now that you were 30 years ago, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you. So you need to expect your spouse to change. I know I've changed in 45 years of marriage. I also know that people tend to resist change. You know, especially if you married somebody and you figure, I got them just like I want them, you know, and then they start to change. You sort of resist that. That's human nature. And so what happens is we don't embrace those changes. Now, some of those changes are less stressful, like, you know, the chicken wing thing. I mean, you can just go and buy a box of chicken wings. You don't have to buy the whole chicken. We can work that out. But there could be more stressful changes. Like, for instance, we got married, and I was playing semi-pro baseball at the time, and I won't give you all the details, but it takes a long time to play these games for a variety of reasons. And I was playing double headers, so I would leave the house at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't get back until 8 o'clock at night on a Sunday. And guess what I came home to? An unhappy woman, okay? So you have, that's a pretty big change when one partner is expecting you, especially on the weekends when you don't have to work, to be there and you're going to be all cuddly on the couch watching movies and all. Meantime, that spouse is not around. He's out doing something else. And that was not the way it was when you got into this marriage. Now, thankfully, we've gotten pretty good at figuring out how how to flow with these changes, but these kind of things come up all the time. And it's normal to initially resist them, but that's when we think they're going to have a negative effect. And change doesn't always have to have a negative effect, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm going to let my wife share a little bit right now.
So you can't change your spouse or convince them to make changes you'd like to see. You got to be careful that you don't start comparing the changes in your marriage to the changes you've seen in other people's marriage. And so then the conversation goes something like this. We have a set of friends, and this particular husband is really good with like combing little girls' hair and dressing them to get them ready for church and everything. And so everybody would look at him as the standard. You know, like, man, I wish you were more like so-and-so. You ever heard that in your marriage? Like, if you could just get the kids ready like so-and-so, we'd have the perfect marriage. Or if he did this or if he did that, everything would be great. But you married somebody very different and very special than the person that you're admiring from afar. Like, you know, he had his own little quirks and I wouldn't want to be married to him. But as far as combing the little girls' hairs and getting them dressed, he was like the perfect dad on a Sunday morning. But it is important for you to figure out how to cope with changes in your marriage. And the thing is, marriage is like life. There are decades of things that happen. In the first decade of marriage, you're sort of in a waltzy sort of stage. You're waltzing around, dancing. For those of you who aren't old enough to know, it's a dance where you hold each other and you don't dance apart. You dance very close and you're feeling very good. And marriage in the beginning can feel like it's just a beautiful waltz. And then, I don't know, something just happens. Now you're in the second decade and all of a sudden you see all the warts on your husband. And you're looking and going, he had beautiful skin when we got married. What happened? What is that? Like, why are you cranky all the time? Or why are you always picking on me? Or why am I never not good enough? Or better yet, you're a mess. You need to change. You don't look good anymore. And you start picking at the faults in the other person. And then now you're like a little bit further along, you're in that third decade, and you either start going, I don't like the way this is working out for me at all, or you say, gee, I finally arrived. And just when you think you've arrived, something else arrives right along with it. And now you're a, God forbid, parent. And that then changes the dynamic of your relationship again. You have to be careful that you accept change as for the better. You know how spiritually we're growing and you suddenly find yourself changing spiritually, and sometimes that's very uncomfortable. Like, as disciples, we can be comfortable in, I know the scriptures I hang on to when I'm in trouble, I know how to get, and all of a sudden God will take you to a place you don't really want to go. And then you have to make a change. You have to wrestle your relationship with God to get on God's page. Sometimes in your marriage, you've got to wrestle that relationship so you can get on your page. Does that make sense? To those of you who are babies know what I mean. It is that you cannot control anybody except yourself. Amen. And I'll tell you this, and as far as change goes, Dale and I had a huge bump this week. Oh my gosh, just huge. And when you've been married a long time and you fight, it is like death to Smoochie. It just is like you can't recover. So we're in this state of depression because we've had this fight where we're not really eating, or we can't find anything to eat that we like, and we're, you know, and you realize somewhere in the trauma of why we had a fight, we had lost sight of, wait a minute, this is not, in the scheme of our lives, this is not that important. In the moment, it was very important. But in the scheme of our lives, it's not that important. And so even after we have resolved it.
I believe so, yes.
Yes. So if we seem a little off today, it's because now we're in recovery. So when you're old and you fight, then you have to go into recovery. So because you're worried that everything you say is the wrong thing, like you say, what would you like for breakfast? I don't know. Would you like this? I don't know. Would you like that? I don't know. Now you're like, oh my gosh, so I'm not eating, I'm gonna go to bed because I'm really in my heart depressed and I don't know how to change the dynamic. So my thing is, if the fight is over, let's just resume normal activities and go on about our business. Dale's way is not my way. So we've had to sort of waltz around. Okay, we've had this fight, we saw where we were both wrong, we've resolved the fight, and now we're in recovery, which can take a few days.
It could.
And, but while you're fighting, it should not affect your sex life, so that's one way you can hurry up and get through the fight.
Everything's good. So let's get back to changing. And what we need to realize is that even when you're like, you girded up your loins for change, because you know change is going to come, it's inevitable. It is inevitable, it's also something else. It's unpredictable. You know, when you agree to be part of someone's life, you certainly need to be aware of the possibility, not the certainty really, of change. The problem is that it doesn't happen when we expect it to happen. It doesn't happen like we think it's going to happen, and it doesn't happen all at once. It's sort of gradual, you don't even notice it for a while until there's a problem. Then you notice, oh, some stuff has changed here. So what happens when one day you wake up and that person who you sleep with is, you thought was your best friend, is suddenly the most selfish person you ever met and really isn't that cute or that entertaining anymore? What are you going to do then? Well, we came up with a list of a few things, like 8 things here that you could focus on. We could come up with 80 things. When you've been married as long as we have, you could come up with a long list of things. Right, Wayne Cherry? You can, if you want to, you can come up with negative stuff from now until Sunday. Not a good idea. But let's talk about a few stumbling blocks or little foxes that can get in there. From fulfillment to disillusionment. And you hear things like, you don't seem to care the way you used to care. From excitement to boredom. But what happened to our spark? We used to have a spark. Now we don't seem to have a spark anymore. From constructive challenges to destructive conflicts. I mean, that's a big one, okay? It's like, why does every disagreement that we have become an argument now? We used to, be able to disagree and say, okay, honey, I understand. I know what you're saying. I just don't see it that way. Now it always becomes an argument, all right? From sacrificing for your partner to self-preservation, where you just sort of say, I hope you wouldn't say this to your spouse, but you say it to yourself. I just can't put him or her first anymore. I gotta look out for me a bit here. From being a team to operating solo, where you think back, and listen, we certainly are a perfect example. When we first got married, we did everything together. We couldn't even get to work because I would drive her to work and we'd sit in the car. And she'd be late for work because we're sitting in the car. But now, you think about it, say, I handled most of my challenges without you. Now, we don't ever seem to have gotten there. We're a little strange, but that happens a lot. From feeling unconditionally loved to feeling like you're constantly on trial. Like before you loved me without question, everything I did was so wonderful. Now I got to fight with you just to prove my worth, just to sort of prove I'm still worthy of being married to you. From focusing on the relationship to pursuing outside interests. And that I think, is a bit how my wife felt when I took up this new hobby of playing tennis. I played baseball, and that was a bad thing, so I stopped that. I started playing tennis. But when you live in New York, which I did, getting to anything worthwhile is a fight. So you can't show up at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning and expect to play tennis. So, being the addictive personality that I am, I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, we'd get to the court at 6, we'd climb the 20-foot high fence, because they lock the courts up. We'd climb the 20-foot high fence to be on the court at 6 a.m. Now, the only reason that I did that was because when I used to go to play at noon, I'd come home at 7 o'clock. That wasn't working out. And my wife, I'm sure, felt like I'm no longer focused on this relationship. So I started the 6 a.m. routine. Now, I played from 6 to 9. I was home 9:30, quarter to 10. She was just waking up, and it all worked out great. But that's the kind of thing that you need to do. When you go from common goals to different dreams, we just don't seem to want the same things anymore. We seem to be on a different page in our lives here. So how do you start having important conversations about overcoming these kinds of stumbling blocks or little foxes, as I call them, in the relationship? Okay, the first thing, and this is important, the first thing you got to do is you're going to figure out what you're going to say, and you're going to figure out how you're going to say it. Which means, let me say the second part again, how you're going to say it. So that means you probably need to have a talk with yourself. You might even need to stand in front of the mirror. If you got a really good friend or somebody that you trust, somebody who's wise, you might want to sit down with them and have that conversation with them first, and then go and talk it over with your spouse. Because if you just jump right in off the cuff, you're probably going to get in trouble. The key to these conversations is really to be honest and to listen closely and openly to your spouse. You don't want to get involved with judging yourself or judging them. That's not what you want to do. And another key is, if during that conversation, one of the partners gets too emotional, time for a break. Don't try to fight through that emotional stuff. You just get yourself entangled, and now you got to deal with that situation before you can get back to what you were really trying to talk about. Okay?
So you want to go back to the beginning of your relationship when you're getting into those situations where, for the sisters, your heart starts pounding and you got to figure out how to say what you want to say. And now you got to figure out how to say it respectfully, and how do I get it out, and how do I not stuff it down. And you might want to remember the moments when you first fell in love and share those memories with your partner. Like we do that. We were talking about, my favorite thing about Dale is that he didn't even know I was alive. He was so busy playing punch ball when we were in junior high school. He was probably one of the few guys in junior high school who didn't know I lived in junior high school. And he's out there with his little friend, and they're playing punch ball. And anyway, it's a cute story. It was very cute. Yeah, that's the... But he wasn't alert, like the other little 8th graders were alert. Hey, you want to go out with me? No. So I had to send him a note saying, meet me. No, I didn't trip him. I said, Jerry, I said, meet me, because we were in junior high school and they had, classes and you passed. And he passed me every day. But he had either had his head down or he just wasn't, I don't know. But so I sent him a note. Meet me between classes. And of course that day, our class got stuck and I was getting out of class late, but he waited and we met. But that's such a fond memory. Like, oh my gosh, if I never wrote that note, where would my life be? I guess he would have never met me. He would have gone on because he was really, really super smart and left junior high school early. But it's a fond memory. We talk about when we were dating and he had a job. He used to sell shoes to the little kiddies like Buster Brown and Stride Right. And you knew moms wouldn't know anything about that anymore. But he used to sell little baby shoes. And he used to come home for a Friday night date from work with this chocolate cupcake and a bag full of Bazooka bubble gum, which I love to death. And so when we get in that space of man, this ain't working out so good for us. We can always go back. And for those moments, if you do it well, you are right there. Like, I can see him coming in. I can tell you it was in a little box. It was wrapped up in blue and white string that they tied around from the bakery back then. And he always had a little brown bag full of bubble gum. So my life was really good. Now, if you can understand, there isn't much pressure, but there's so much attention to who you are. And that person loves you. You have to think about those positive things and talk about them, because they do rekindle what you've done. Now, change can be a good thing. And so you have to comment on the good things. Like, when he's trying to lose weight and you see him and you catch him and you realize, uh-oh, he's done it. Like, he's like 20 pounds lighter or something, and I'm 20 pounds heavier. I don't know how that always happens. But you have to say, honey, you look great. Matter of fact, let's have a date later. When can we get together? In the car. We'll meet in the garage, because we can sit in the car and pretend we're not 67, 68 years old. You've got to be hopeful in the change. You've really got to decide, what? I'm changing. I can't change Dale. I never could. And I was never one of those brides who thought, I'm going to come up with a list of things I want to change about him. I will pray for change. I will pray for change. Like, if he's not doing something that I really feel like he needs to do, I'm going to take that to God. And if the answer is no, I'm going to accept that. Like, because I can't change, he can't change me. He can disciple me, but he can't make me do anything. So if I don't make the changes, even though he's showing me the way to go, he can't take me there if I don't do what's necessary to change.
Okay. Did you do number 2? I'll do it.
I do. Oh,
Okay.
no.
All right, so the second thing would be to evaluate your current relationship. And that's just, once again, that's just simply sitting down and talking honestly about how you feel and the state of your relationship. Now remember, you want to have that conversation with yourself first. You don't want to just jump into that, okay? And you can discuss both the positive and the negative, as long as you're doing it with love and in a way that you know your spouse can accept. And you can ask questions like, what are the positive things that I still feel about you? In what ways have I changed that you're not thrilled with? You don't want to say, in what ways have I changed that you really don't like? Because you're opening a bad door there. You don't want to go through that door. What things have changed about me that you're not thrilled with? What do I miss most about our relationship that we used to have? What do I still look forward to or enjoy doing with you? You get the idea? You get the idea? So you want to be able to evaluate your relationship. You want to try to figure out when you began to drift. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, when did you sort of feel you guys sort of growing apart a little bit? Okay? Because these problems start off slow, and they build momentum mostly because we don't resolve these things. So there's questions you could ask there, like, do you remember a specific time or event when you began to feel that there was some drifting, some separation? I know my wife was talking about this mild rift that we had this past weekend. I mean, we can both put our finger right on, oh, we know when that happened. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just sort of almost imperceptibly drift apart a little bit. But if you can, try to put your finger on that. And in general, it's some sort of disagreement you had, and you need to ask yourself, what stopped us from resolving that? What kept us from bringing that to a conclusion and getting it out of the way? Also, what prevented your recovery at the time that this stumble occurred? Because very likely what happens is, if you didn't resolve something from the past, and that whatever stopped you from resolving that is what's stopping you from resolving stuff now. Like, maybe you're afraid to be vulnerable because you've been hurt, you don't want to get hurt again. Or, you feel like if you try to pursue it, your spouse is going to get angrier, so you just accept it and hope it goes away. Or you think that if you're talking about it, it's going to get worse. All of those things can happen, which is why we need to be careful about how we go into these things, but we can't just let them lay there, because they don't die. They take root and they grow in our relationships, and it just comes up in a different way later on.
Did you do that one?
No, we've got to do 5.
So,
And 6, 5.
what you need from each other is to awaken your love. Sometimes it's as simple in the scheme of things of saying, you know what, I really love you, because it will turn the dynamic in a way that makes you stop and think, wait a minute, we're not really enemies, we're just not connecting. And so we've got to figure out what broke that connection. And then you've got to be willing, and this is often hard when you're going through stuff, to accept what another person is saying about you with the premise that it's true. Because if you don't, then you won't forgive the person. Because deep down in your heart, you're saying, well, he's just saying he loves me to stop the fight, or he's just saying it to shut me up, or whatever. But if you do that when you consistently are at odds, you'll find that it's much easier to trust what the person is saying to you when things go bad. Dale is good at saying, I love you. Now, Cherry and Wayne can understand this, but as you get older, there are less and less days left to say these things. So if you're holding back because you feel like, well, I'll get to it one of these days, them days may never come. So you need to start going back and saying, though, like, you are so sweet. Or when he opens the car door for you and you're like, unexpectedly, he's doing something gallant and you're like, it's about time. You have got to say, wow, that's so sweet, because you want to encourage that behavior and reinforce those things. There's nothing wrong, sisters, with saying, I need more intimacy.
Yeah.
Calm yourself. And I'm not necessarily talking about sex. I'm talking about pure intimacy. I like holding hands with Dale. If we get to hold hands, chances are we're going to carry on later on. Because there's something about a connection to him that means something important. What will you do differently? This is a question for you to safeguard your relationship in the future. Are you more interested in being right than doing what's right? And that's a really hard question, because I'm a good fighter. And if I believe I'm right, I'm going to hold my ground like you have never seen the ground held, because I'm right. And my friends know I don't give it up easy. But I had to get to a point in my life where I said, is it more important to be right or to do what's right? Amen. See, as a disciple, we have to do what's right. Doesn't matter if we're fighting, we're both wrong. Because James says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? You don't get your way. Let's face it, we're a selfish bunch inside of our marriage. We can be so generous outside of the marriage and selfish pigs inside the marriage. Yes. This is what I want. Oh, you need something? When you get me what I want, I might be able to fix your needs. So you have to be careful that you don't waste your prime time energy so far outside of your marriage that you have nothing left when you get back to the marriage.
Deuteronomy chapter 6. Starting in verse 5. A lot of you can pretty much quote this. You got it memorized. It says, love the Lord your God with all your strength. I'm sorry. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give to you today are to be upon your hearts. We're talking about change and how to handle change, how to deal with it. First and foremost, You need to be a man or woman of God.
Amen.
I've read the scripture, and I guarantee you everybody in here has heard it. Most of us have heard it 100 times. But we don't use them or remember them when we get upset. Our default when we're upset is to do what we've always done in the past, whatever that may be. It's something that we came up with, something that we think is the best way to handle it. And certainly, as my wife said, if you're right, well, that's it. You're just going to have to figure out what to do because I'm right. But that's why it's so important to constantly strengthen our relationship with God. Because we do have a default mode when we get upset. But that default mode needs to be responses that would be godly. That's only going to happen if we're really men and women of God. If we're really in the Word of God. If we're really trying to apply those things to our lives. Then we've got a chance of responding in a godly manner. Does that make sense? Okay, I got a big, bold, okay, so everything else is at a font of 12. This is at 18. It says, do not use social media as your primary means of communication. I'm going to say it again. Do not use social media as your primary means of communication. Now, I'm looking at Mike and Becky and I'm saying that's probably not their issue. But we got some folks out here who are young and married and who pretty much grew up communicating electronically. That ain't going to work in marriage. It's just not. If you're in the bedroom and he's in the kitchen and you're sending him a text, something's wrong. That's not how you need to communicate. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we've got a whole class on communication coming up, but that's a biggie. That's a biggie, okay? Please keep that in mind. Moving on. Comfort, security, and stability are some of the wonderful things that we get out of our marriage. Unfortunately, we can also use those things against us. So what happens is sometimes unconsciously, it's a signal that we've made it. And we can get lazy in our efforts to maintain the quality of our relationship. What we got to do is we got to go back to that courtship period. You know, I think back to before Thais and I got married, we got together for the last time before we got married in March of 1972. And we wound up getting married in July of 1973. That's about a 15-month period. And now we weren't disciples, but it's hard to imagine any time we weren't together. I mean, we just loved being together. It didn't matter. We could just get in the car and just drive because we didn't have any money. So we just get in the car and just drive. And that was great. We loved it. Now, you say, well, let's have a date night. Okay, what you want to do? Well, I don't know what you want to do. No, I don't want to go to the movie. No, I don't want to go to the movie. You want to go to dinner? We got food at home. But you can't figure out what to do. Go back to when you were courting. Now, once again, you young people say, what's courting? Look it up. That's why you got Google. But go back to that period. You found stuff to do then, didn't you? Oh, yeah. Couldn't keep you apart, right? So go back to that period. See, in a successful marriage, there's no end point or finish line. That doesn't exist. You're in constant evolution with your partner, growing, and once you accept that, then you can make this mutual commitment to maintaining what you put into your marriage. But there's no making it. It's sort of like being a disciple. You never arrive. You're constantly working at it and growing at it. And one of the reasons is because what we're talking about, what this class is about, change. So even if I have figured out what the 1973 Thais is all about and everything she needs to make her happy, it's 2018. And she's changed. And I've changed. So she wants and needs different things. And I can't provide everything now that I could provide then. So there's no end point. There's no finish line. It's not like we're here. This is a long-term relationship. There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be, well, we put it in a nice way, we'll call them heated debates. Okay? But the problem is when we have these heated debates, a lot of us, and this certainly was us for years, and every now and then still now, what we do is we pick up our swords and we fight to the death, right? Somebody's gonna be laying on the floor bleeding when this is all over, right? But what happens when you realize that you've made a vow to love this person for the rest of your life, you're gonna be with them for the rest of your life, right? And that means you're gonna have to fight until the end of your life. Fight to the death, to the end of your life. Well, so that really officially leads you to a crossroads, right? So what are you gonna do? You're gonna continue trying to change your spouse. They already tell you can't change them, but you know, if you're hard-headed, go ahead and try. Or you can start trying to practice accepting your spouse's flaws, because we're all flawed. Now, when I say flaws, I'm not talking about character flaws. Character flaws, that's a discipling issue, that's a biblical issue, that's a being like Jesus issue. I'm talking about personality flaws, which we all have. Some of us are OCD when it comes to neatness. Some of us are just the opposite, right? And maybe you're married to somebody who's in the middle, but they don't like where you are. You know, you get off, you put your clothes on the bed for a minute to take a shower, and they're screaming, "What are clothes doing on the bed?" I'm taking a shower. Can't you hang them up? Oh, gosh, stop already. Well, these are personality issues, and you're going to have to learn to accept some of them. And maybe you can come to some compromise on this, but that person's personality is that they want everything neat immediately. You're not going to completely change that. Now, you can draw your sword and fight to the death over it, but it still won't change. You got to figure that out, okay? Either one of those decisions, whether you're going to fight to the death or you're going to accept some of these personality flaws or imperfections, either decision is going to set the course for your future, and neither one of them is easy. They both take some perseverance, but only one is going to create marital success. You decide which one it's going to be.
So here's a short list of tricks on how to avoid and overcome your little problems. Remember, we're talking about change. Try to understand. You know, when Dale and I had this hiccup this week, the biggest thing was I didn't understand his position. And so I had my feelings, but my feelings are not always facts, but they're real nonetheless. And so I kept asking, okay, tell me why you feel this way. I don't understand. I just don't understand. And he would say something, and sometimes his response made it worse. Yep. And I got to the point where you're like, so you care more about that person than you care about me. And that's when you know the fight has escalated to the, I don't know, it was just there. And now you've got to try and figure out, okay, that this approach is not working. So he says, as he would, are we good? And I'm thinking, oh, so you want me to answer that question? And I'm thinking, are we good? Give me a minute, because we weren't good. But I needed, in order to resolve the issue, I did need to understand his position, because his position was very different than mine. Dale is very mild-mannered in general. It takes a lot to get him upset. The standard for the family is somewhere in the stratosphere, and for everybody else, it's like, okay, I see, I get it. And you're like, I want what they have. Just drop that standard 100 feet and we could talk. But when you realize at a certain point in the middle of the I'm killing him moment, and I said, I'm not ready to talk yet. So that should be a signal to him to say nothing else. Because we have had those fights that if you say one more word, it's going. And I can't pull myself back. He was particularly quiet, whereas he didn't push to, oh, we need to resolve this and we need to get this done. He just let it lay there for a little while. And then I figured maybe the question I'm asking isn't garnering what I need. So I'm going to come at it from a different direction. I need to understand, but his answer is only making me madder. I don't know that any of you all have these problems. But What I ended up doing was reminding myself of this little thing. He's not trying to hurt me. So the fact that I'm hurt may be something that I have now internalized, and I need to externalize it, take it out of myself, and just think about him. And once I could think about him, it made everything a lot easier to talk about. So then I could ask questions that would get him to think and tell him why I'm so hurt, which is important. So you've also got to be wise when you have these conversations. If his head is exploding because you've said and done the wrong thing, that may not be the best time to continue to explore whatever's going on. You might need to take a break. And then you might need to come back with a different approach. Does that make sense? Because the first approach just wasn't working.
All right, so we're running out of time, so I'm going to move through these a little more quickly. The second little tip is let the past be the past. No one wants to be reminded that they're no longer as good as they used to be. And the fact is, none of us are as good as we used to be, right? But nobody likes to be reminded of that. So let the past be the past.
Don't point fingers. Don't say it's all you, like you have no responsibility. Always take responsibility for where you are in the relationship.
Okay, give it some time. Sometimes when you see these changes coming and they're really annoying or bothersome or scary, sometimes they're only temporary. You know, your spouse may grow out of it. And sometimes if you give it a try, you might actually enjoy the changes.
Renew that love that you had, despite all the changes that are going on in your life. Deep down inside, as you two have grown together, you've got to remember you really care for that person and you really love that person. So you've got to work on renewing your love for that person, not just making assumptions. Assumptions will take you down a very bad hole.
Yes, dear. Okay, so sometimes changes come from external pressures, and other times they come from internal stresses. But it doesn't matter what the source of the change is. We really need to embrace the challenges that life brings on us. And doing that can bring maturity to us as it develops us within the relationship. You know, the Message translation of the Bible is not my favorite translation, but it serves a good purpose here, and I actually wrote it down. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4 says in the Message, "Consider it sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work so you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way." I think that's a great way to say it because, yeah, we get into these conflicts, and I know for me, as soon as we're in it, I want out. What I got to do to end this? I can't live like this. But sometimes, when we go through it in the proper manner, it is helpful to us. It matures us, and it actually brings us closer together because it helps you to understand your spouse more than you did before. Okay?
So then there's the family first lane. Fast lane, which when the children come, everything changes. And sometimes we can change the priority of our lives and put the marriage aside while we play mommy and daddy. So there's a whole class that's going to talk to you about parenting. But remember, your goal as husband and wife is to not let anything drift you apart, not even the children. Then there's that old, and these are the joys of getting older, the midlife moments, where suddenly everything has changed. You know, like things start dropping, drooping, falling. Nothing is up and perky as it once was, and you're now it does happen, in that season of life where things are awkward. And so you've got to figure out again, there's a whole class that's going to help you get through the seasons, but you've got to remember that marriage is this core thing in how you approach things rather than we're old geezers and this isn't working, but we've been together so long, we'll just sit in the rocking chair and be happy.
Okay, so we're going to close it out here. Let's see, what
Late.
time is it? 8:46. It takes a couple minutes. So no matter the season of marriage or the changes that's coming your way, it's essential to understand this thing, that men and women tend to deal with the stresses of change differently. Women tend to want to talk it out, and men tend to want to stuff it in and not talk about it. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that, but in general, that's how these sexes respond. Now, if you're aware of these kind of differences, then it can help to minimize the tension that follows these kinds of stressful situations. Change, as I said before, is inevitable. Sometimes it's difficult to deal with, but remember that your God never changes, and you can always rely on his love and his wisdom. That's what Hebrews 13:8 is talking about when it says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So we can always rely on God, even as these changes come about, and that's what we should do, because that's really the only way we're going to get through them. We are two imperfect individuals coming together, and who knows what's going to happen when you throw them into the same household and there's no place to go. You know, when you were courting, if you had a little argument, you go home. Well, you're home now, there's no place to go. Okay? So you can't always foresee the changes that are going to affect your marriage, but you always have a choice as to whether those changes are going to make you resilient or they're going to make you want to run. How you handle it is going to define the quality of your love, and that's year after year. You know, we do these marriage vows, and in those vows, we've decided to love until death do us part. That's a pretty heavy vow. I mean, we say it because we're just thrilled to get this person that we want, but that's a pretty heavy vow, you know. Now, you got to decide to recognize and embrace change and embrace that vow that you made so that you can, as they say in the fairy tales, live happily ever after. Amen. That's the class for tonight. We appreciate you guys.